All right, here we are, round two. The activity is a social studies skill builder. This is phase two, the global grid, latitude and longitude and symbols. It's a lot of stuff, but if you're paying attention, you're looking at some information on your map, you should get an understanding of the different components that have to do with the global grid, the ideas of latitude and longitude, and the symbols that go along with all this stuff. So let's see once what we can figure out. So we're going to start here with asking a question. What are the lines that circle the Earth called? You see some examples here on the picture of the Earth here on the top. I want you to think about that a second. These are what we call parallels of latitude, and these start to make up one piece of the global grid. So something to keep in mind, parallels of latitude. So in what direction do these parallels circle the Earth? Okay, so think about your compass rose, which you're getting more familiar with, and look at the direction that these lines are going. What direction are we talking? East to west, of course. So you're looking at those lines, they stretch east to west, and we'll dig a little bit more in depth to see what we've got going on here. So what is the parallel in the center of the Earth called? So look at the red line up here. And what we've got what's called the equator. Okay, the equator is that line that basically is in the center of the Earth. It's kind of like a big belt for our planet. So why is it important to understand where the equator is and what it is? Basically, it serves as a reference when measuring latitude. So what we've got to know is that that's where we start, and then the other lines go off of the equator, and that's how we're able to measure our global grid and our lines of latitude. So the question then is, how do we measure parallels of latitude? Okay, now if you're not sure what parallels are, it means that these lines essentially are side by side. They never intersect, they never cross over. So how do we measure these parallels of latitude? And we call this, we measure them with degrees, okay? And we're not talking about temperature, we're talking more about angular degrees. And it serves as a reference when measuring latitude. So if you move north from the equator, the parallel latitude is x degrees north, or x degrees n, and that means if you're moving north, however many degrees you've gone, that's what latitude that you're on. If you move south from the equator, the parallel latitude is x degrees south, or x degrees south, and you notice the little symbol here that tells us that we're talking about these degrees. So if you're moving south, however many degrees you're moving, that's what parallel of latitude you would be on. So as you move away from the equator in either direction, the parallels of latitude become higher in number because the angles get larger. So if you take a look at this one over here, as you're moving up, and because the Earth is round, all of a sudden the angles become higher, and that's how you know why the numbers get larger, because essentially the angle from the center of the Earth up is that particular line of latitude. The farthest point north is 90 degrees, which is the North Pole. So if you were to have a right angle and going straight up, that would be 90 degrees. Okay, and that's what we call the North Pole. The farthest point south is 90 degrees south, which is the South Pole. So basically it's on the opposite end of the Earth. So you see that South Pole is at the very bottom, and that would be 90 degrees south. So we've got the equator at 0, we've got the North Pole at 90 degrees north, and the South Pole at 90 degrees south. So then that brings us to the other part of the global grid. What are lines that run from the North Pole to the South Pole called? So it's these bands that go around the Earth from north to south. These are what we call meridians of longitude. Okay, it kind of looks like longitude. If that helps you remember it, by all means call it that. Okay, but these are the lines that stretch from the North Pole to the South Pole. What is the central meridian called? And then why is it important? So if you take a look at the one right in the center, you'll notice that the name of it is what we call the prime meridian. And we got to know, why is this important? And think about it in terms of the same reason the equator is important. Prime meridian serves as a reference when measuring longitude. Okay, the same way that the equator does for lines of latitude, the prime meridian does the same thing for lines of longitude. So how do we measure meridians of longitude? Again, you're taking a look at a very similar picture that we saw with the equator. Now we've just turned it on its side in order to understand how we measure these. And again, we measure it with degrees. If you move east from the prime meridian, the meridian of longitude is x degrees east. So we're talking about this right here, okay? So if you're moving this way, you'd be moving a certain amount of degrees east, and our examples are 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees east. If you move west from the prime meridian, a meridian of longitude is x degrees west. So if you're heading this way, we've got 15 degrees west, 30 degrees west, 45 degrees west, and 60 degrees west. As you move away from the prime meridian in either directions, the meridians of longitude become higher in number because, again, the angles get larger. So if you start here in the middle, as you're moving out, the angle here gets larger. So the further out you move, the larger the angle is going to get. The farthest point east is 180 degrees east, and that would then bring us all the way back around the other side of the world to the other side of the prime meridian. Farthest point west is 180 degrees west, which is the same as 180 degrees east. So they basically meet at that point. This line is called the international date line. So where 180 degrees west and 180 degrees east meet, this line is called the international date line. So what we're going to do now is you're going to turn to your reading notes for section 4. It's essentially the second one in your packet. It says section 4, the global grid, longitude and latitude. And you're going to look at the questions, and you're going to be marking up this map the same way that you did with the first map for section 3. Okay? And you want to make sure you read your reading notes for section 4 in order to make this happen. Okay? So what do we call the grid lines on the map? Okay? We call it a map grid, and we practiced this before, and you notice that now it's being measured in degrees, but the idea is more or less the same. Okay? So what do we call the lines that run east to west on a map? Those are parallels of latitude, if you recall, and those are what start making up the global grid. Where do we begin and end measuring parallels of latitude? What's that one right in the middle that we called? We begin at the equator and then end at 90 degrees north and 90 degrees south of the equator. Okay, and those would be the North Pole and the South Pole. What do we call the lines that run north and south? These are meridians of longitude, so we talked about that. These are the ones that run north to south, starting and ending at the North and South Pole. So they run from the North to the South Pole all the way around the globe. Where do we begin and end measuring meridians of longitude? We begin at the prime meridian and end at 180 degrees east and 180 degrees west of the prime meridian. So if we were to wrap it around, you'd have the prime meridian, and then you would have these two areas meet at what's known as the international date line, where 180 degrees east meets 180 degrees west. So how can you use latitude and longitude to identify the location of the red dot? If you go over 15 degrees and you meet it at 105 degrees west, that's how we can find where the red dot is located. Use the coordinates 45 degrees north latitude and 105 degrees west longitude, and there you have it. What will you find at 30 degrees south and 135 degrees east? So let's take a look. Let's find those lines on here. Going down that way, and then it meets right over here. Where does that get us? Right there on the island of Australia. Okay, so that's how we have these things meet. You got to know the north and the south portions, the east and the west portions, and then you got to find the degrees of latitude and longitude, and that'll get you to your point on the map. So now, read section 4, the global grid. I told you before, we're talking about latitude and longitude, and you want to make sure that you read through this to reinforce the things that I've talked about on this particular video. Think about what it is that I've been showing you. Read through to reinforce those ideas, and you will have a better understanding of the global grid, the ideas of latitude and longitude, and how those things are measured. All right, take it away.